there's really a wealth of rare, medium rare, and interesting material just right here within 2 or 3 square blocks at their disposal because of our CPL's collections, because of the South Carolina Center for Children's Books that then cycles its materials down to us in our juvenile literature collection in Cooper, which is down on level 1, 30,000 books strong, coupled with the collections that are here in this department. A historical children's literature collection, which has, I want to say, about 4,000 volumes, going from published from 1650 to about 1950. So about 300 years of European and American children's books, or books for children, or books that children may have had access to or interacted with, depending on the time and place they were published in. And then the Augusta Baker collection, which is about 1,500 volumes, and was Augusta's own personal library that then she gave to us. And then her papers, of course, are in the Caroliniana Library. And that collection essentially picks up in around the 1940s or 50s, and it comes forth to the present day. And we've been adding to it a little bit over the years to kind of help round it off and get current books into the collection. So it, coupled with the historical collection, gives you a vast, sweeping, documentary history of children's literature here. So, for example, familiar face to us all. This is a reprint of the famous My Dog Rinty. This is from the original one was the first printing was 1946. It was reprinted in 48, printed in 51, 55, and I think this is either 1962 or 1964 reprint. It went through a tremendous amount of editions just in a 10-year time span, and this was, part of that sea change in children's literature in the middle of the 20th century, when books that reflected the everyday African-American experience actually, were brought out by mainstream publishers and marketed to libraries and to readers as just part and parcel of everyday life and all the subjects that children would want to read or have access to or learn about. And it's photographically illustrated, of course. It's, a sort of a day in the life, or a day in 2 weeks of the life of a young boy in Harlem and his dog. And of course, one of the things that he goes on to on his adventure is hearing a story at the 135th Street branch of the NYPL, hearing a story from the story lady who just happened to be Augusta Baker. So this is great because it's Augusta Baker in a children's book as well, fairly early on in her career. So I always like to just start and use that as a touchstone. I have a couple early books out. I just wanted to go through them briefly just to show you again what kinds of things that are in this collection that are available for use and consultation, but also reflect some of the types of things that children may have had some sort of access to, let's say, pre-1800. So some early things. And I'll go through them very quickly. We can look at them after, and I have then some other things out around here we can all look at it and talk about. But this is one of the earliest books in our collection, and it's a lovely thing. It's a collection of the Fables of La Fontaine, and someone who you might be familiar with, of course. This is 1688, and printed in The Hague in a very elaborate edition. This is printed during his lifetime. He was sort of minor nobility, contemporary of Racine and Molière. He wrote plays, he wrote racy stories, but he also is especially known now, I think, today in multiple circles for collecting, writing, and also reworking fables and fairy tales. In this case, these are all done in verse. So that's projected pretty well, actually. Sort of a one leaf, 2 pages per tale, with these wonderful copper-plate engravings, very elaborate for the time. These were done by a Dutch engraver who had done serious sort of high-level work, and the people who research old masters are quite. This is Martin de Hoog, I think. But in any case, the text is then written into verse, We don't have a moral at the end. It's just a straight 18, 20, 24, 30 stanza poem retelling these fables. And there's an introduction that, again, gives, Fontaine is writing about Aesop, writing about the tradition of this oral and manuscript storytelling that then sort of gets translated or told or retold by different people at different times. And that's what he's doing here. He's taking some of Aesop and retelling it, but he's also writing his own fables as well and interspersing them into it. But this is just a wonderful edition. You can see it's bound in gold, it's gilt all around the text block, 2 volumes, these elaborate hand-colored end papers, and something that was available to a very narrow slice of the population at the time, 1688 in Europe, as opposed to, well, you think of what types of books might have been produced in America in 1688, and they certainly didn't look like this, I can assure you. So again, this is a very elaborate, expensive, self-defined, extravagant book for a very narrow slice of the literate population. Small edition, maybe it would have been produced about 300 copies, maybe more, but not too many. So we have things like that here, and we have a number of other 17th century editions. I have a sort of theme here of Aesop today, since we're talking about stories and storytelling. This is a 1712 London edition of Aesop in English and Latin, parallel text, one down either side of the page, and it states its purpose quite explicitly right here. So that little children, being used to write and translate them, may not only more exactly understand all the rules of grammar, but also learn to imitate the right compositions of words and the proper forms of speech belonging to both languages. So, young boy, probably boy, maybe girl, but not too many, in terms of the gender breakdown of who would have been learning to read and write. Young boys learning to read and write English and Latin simultaneously at a very early age. And in this case, this is in very tiny text. Each tale, like tale 46, of 2 young men, in this case, five sentences is the tale, and then 6 sentences your moral. If we do anything amiss, men do not presently know it, but God, who sitteth above the heavens and beholdeth the bottomless depth, sees all things. And then you have a sort of a translation or an interpretation of the moral as the 7th sentence in this little chapter, which if men but do consider, they will sin more closely and warily. So, being told, retold, and retold, in this case, condensed for a slightly different audience. No text, only text, no illustrations, and in we're approaching a sort of a child-sized book here. We're starting to get smaller. Publishers in the 18th century in England, certainly, and in America a little bit, are starting to recognize that children could be a market for books, that you could publish either school books or textbooks, proto-textbooks or grammars, or books of tales like this for a young audience, and they're starting to make the size appropriate. Another one this is England, 1792, and this is called a hieroglyphic Bible. And select passages represented with emblematical figures for the amusement of youth. We have amusement first. We don't have just moral instruction. And designed to familiarize tender age in a pleasing and diverting manner with early ideas of the scriptures. And what you get is this sort of rebus-like construction. So God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing. So you have to read, recognize the pictures of these objects that are in the world, make that association, and then continue. So it's made, it's providing added context to a text that young children certainly would have known from oral recitation, but it's actually sort of grounding it in pictures as well. And then underneath, you can see this is the actual text of the passage that's illustrated above, so you can't actually just read it straight, or you can cover it up and figure it out, and then find out if what you thought was the right translation worked. And this is again a small little book. It's an abridgment. But there are a lot of examples of these hieroglyphic Bibles in Britain and America in the 18th century. Lovely, lovely little things. Here's one more Aesop. I'm just going to keep moving through these quickly. This is New York, 1834, Aesop Jr. in America. And here he is conversing with the animals. Opposite it, of course, we have George Washington. Why not, right? And then underneath, you have the caption, which is interesting. An example to the citizens, an ornament to the republic, invested with the highest executive magistracy, he well performed the duty of protecting industry and restraining fraud and violence. And at length he enjoyed for a short time a dignified repose. And there's George Washington in Mount Vernon, sort of enjoying his retirement with sheep and dogs and foxes running all around. So he didn't win the revolution. He wasn't our first president and defender of the Constitution. He protected industry. Okay, so this is a hint of what's to come in this version. A series of fables written expressly for the people of the United States of America. So just as we had a new dictionary and new grammars and new ways of speaking and learning in this new republic, so too we need a new series of fables to tell us how to relate to the world in this new democratic experiment. And so what you find in here are the fables. They're not illustrated, but they're just written out as a prose narrative. Your moral is in verse here. And the morals provide an interpretation that is devoted to hard work and technological innovation and proto-capitalist expansion and thrift and investment and the protection of commerce and all the sort of things you would find in a budding young nation of industrialists to be. So it's rewriting Aesop for a particular time and place, and in this case, trying to work through the democratic and commercial values of this new republic. So, interesting. And I could show you 10 or 20 or 30 different examples of Aesop being written and rewritten and told and retold in different times and different places for different purposes even. So for example, this is Jerry Pinkney, who's one of our favorite illustrators, writing, in this case, writing and illustrating a book of Aesop this is only a couple of years ago, this is 2000. And of course, Jerry was on campus twice now, I think, in the past couple of years. So he was able to sign some of our copies here for the Augusta Baker collection. So we're very happy to count Jerry as one of our friends and good acquaintances now. Hope we'll be seeing him again. But again, it's interesting. I always like to talk to students about how some of these stories that are just now a part of the vernacular do get told and retold for different audiences at different times. And that comes out in our historical collection, and also especially comes out in the Augusta Baker collection, very much so. So what else do I have? Oh, this is kind of fun. This is one of the first purely imaginative children's books in the collection. They're all the 18th century ones, for the most part, are providing some sort of moral instruction, or they're providing lessons in grammar and conduct, couched in sort of instructive terms. This is Philadelphia, 1836, and Peter Piper's Practical Principles of Plain and Perfect Pronunciation. And it's an ABC book as well. So Andrew Airpump asked his aunt her ailment. Did Andrew Airpump ask his aunt her ailment? And so it goes through it. And this is, you can compare this, Philadelphia 1836, with, The Hague in 1688, and you can see it's quite a different thing. This is Peter Piper is brought out quickly and cheaply for amusement, for fun, to sell. The illustrations are printed in black, and then they're hand colored in with watercolor afterwards. And they're quickly done, probably with the stencils, so they're going outside the lines, and they're kind of wiggly and everything, and they're kind of fun. But definitely a different type of book for a very different audience, and probably printed in very large quantities. Again, Lanky Lawrence lost his Lassen lobster. Did Lanky Lawrence lose his Lassen lobster? So. And then P finally gets you to Peter Piper as pickled peppers. But a really nice thing, and the sort of thing that doesn't quite survive. And there's a bat and a tiger sitting there for no apparent reason on the back cover. Well, printer had the illustration, so we threw it into the mix and made a cover. Yeah, made it interesting to look at and fun. So something like this. Things that don't often survive can be here and preserved in the collection and interacted with in interesting ways. This is one of my favorite books in the whole collection. There's a company, this printer in New Hampshire called Merrill's brought out a whole series of little children's books in the 1840s. But all they are 8-page little pamphlets. This size, tiny, tiny little thing. And what you have, child's picture book. You have an alphabet. You have the parable of the Good Samaritan. You have a steamship. You have a sailing ship. Ships sail on the sea and go to all parts of the world. We're almost done. The boy's top, the Mexican officer, more cavalry charging. The cow gives milk, the lambs frolic about in the fields and pastures, steamboat. Duck, pitcher, bell, chair, horse. That's it. For a long time I thought that this was just a printer on a rainy day, newspaper office, not having a lot of jobs to work on and just sort of running this up on some extra sheets of paper using their illustrations that they would have had. But then later I found out that they actually did bring out about 8 or 10 of these over the course of the 1840s. So somebody had an interest in Concord, New Hampshire at that point in printing these little cheap, funny books picture books for children. And it's just a wonderful thing because it shows you, again, the scope and range of what would have been produced and what people may have had some access to. I mean, this would have, sold 10 for a nickel or something, presumably. Very cheap, but fun. Nice to have. What else? This is the first edition of Uncle Remus. Again, if you're thinking of American sort of vernacular or Afro-Caribbean American stories that get told and retold, here is a white Southerner writing in dialect in the 1880s, appropriating and telling these vernacular folk tales. And then you can contrast that with Jerry Pinkney in 2000, African-American storyteller and illustrator doing the same thing. We have where is it? No, I think I have it out on the table. A Jerry Pinkney and Julius Lester collaboration. I think they did 5 books over the course of the 80s and 90s of the Uncle Remus tales being told and retold. Again, African-American storyteller, African-American illustrator, combining and retelling these stories for a different audience at a different time. So we have things like that. And here's just, before I talk about the Baker collection and show you some of those, here's just one thing. This is my current little fascination. This is General Lee and Santa Claus, Mrs. Louise Glack's Christmas gift to her little Southern friends. This is printed in the North, in New York, in 1867. And here's this wonderful, wonderful, strange illustration of General Lee interacting somehow with Santa Claus. Okay. So what's going on here? And this is great. This is exactly what I like to show a student class and say, okay, you can do things with this because of the seemingly strange juxtapositions of elements and time frame and everything. 1867, there is this national mood of reconciliation. And it's happening at the political level, obviously. We're not quite into Reconstruction yet, but we're also talking about memory and establishing commerce with the South, everything else. And this is, this Mrs. Louise Glack, don't know anything else about her, attempting another form of reconciliation. This is a story that's supposed to explain to the young children of the South why they didn't have Christmas for the past 4 years, from 1861 to 1865. And she's telling it in a way that says that Santa Claus was coming in on Christmas Eve, 1861, and he flew over Richmond or wherever, and General Lee was up looking at the heavens at the stars and flagged him down and said, I appreciate your thoughts, Santa, but could you please take all the gifts for the children of the South and take them back to Baltimore and Philadelphia and sell them and bring back wound dressings, bandages, and supply and food for my troops. I'm sure the children of the South will understand And Santa goes, yes, General, I obey an order. And that happened for 4 successive years. So she's trying to explain to the children of the South why, even though they didn't have Christmas for 4 years, a lot of their fathers were able to be saved and came home. And as a result of all this, now, Christmas can happen again, and we can be safe and prosperous and happy, and the nation can combine and reconcile. So it's really interesting, though, if you get into the context of some of these books, and then also some of the language, of course, that's used. And again, I don't know whether General Lee endorsed this in 1867 in his retirement. I have no idea. But it's just one of those strange and crazy things that I think we can use as teaching tools and learn from. So, okay. The Baker collection. Oh gosh, there's so many interesting things, starting from My Dog Rinty. Here's a great book. This is Isaac Bashevis Singer collaborating with Maurice Sendak on a collection of Jewish American or Yiddish folk tales. This is 1960, 66, 68. It's in Jacket. This is, I think, their first collaboration. They did a couple collaborations over time. But again, it just as an indication of scope and range. It's a presentation copy to Augusta Baker, which is just wonderful. So Friendship and Greetings. And many of the books in the collection, of course, have these wonderful signed inscriptions or presentation notes to Augusta Baker from the authors, from the illustrators along the way. It's really, again, just indicative of her importance and her the reverence which so many authors and illustrators had for her during this time. By this time, the late 60s, she was really influential in seeing things into print and encouraging publishers to take people on. And it's so again, Harper and Row, mainstream New York publishing house, bringing out these things that may not have been published in quite the same way before. I don't know if did I mention this? My Dog Rinty was brought out by Viking Press right from the start in 1946. So a major New York publishing house taking this on right after the Second World War. That's indicative of something too in publishing history and how publishing changed considerably in bringing on African American topics, in looking at American history, for example, and topics in American history in interesting ways for children. This is one of the things that just amazes me still. I don't have a great background in children's literature, but I've been learning a lot over the few years, of course, that I've been working with this collection. But this is a young person's guide to abolitionism, published fairly recently. Large type, under 10-year-old audience, using original paintings, original newspaper excerpts, posters and broadsides from the time, talking about abolitionism. Again, for a very young audience, and incorporating these actual historical sources into it, into a children's storybook. It's just amazing. And I'm continually surprised at the types of things that we find in the collection like this. All these different elements of American history being told for a very young audience. And from abolitionism to, I think I have a book out there on the tables of stories of African American slave revolts brought out for a young adult audience. And so it's a big, thick book. What else? This is great. And again, just as an indicator of the types of things that are in this collection. A Cherokee folktale told by a Cherokee storyteller, illustrated by a Cherokee artist, and brought out by Dial Press, a major New York publishing house. Again, this sort of thing happening in the second half of the 20th century, the late 20th century, just wouldn't have happened in the early 20th century or before. And Augusta Baker and the work she did in New York in the 1950s and 60s is really a part of that shift and that change. There's a direct connection between the types of materials that children have access to now and the work that she did. There's definitely a direct connection. So these things are here. And then what else? I'm going to stop now. We can get up and look around. I have some other early materials here from conduct manuals for young boys to Horatio Alger books to a copy of the magazine for children, St. Nicholas in 1882, to a first edition of Babar, which now is a $5,000 book, if you can imagine. It's
You want us
huge.
to touch it.
It's huge in size and scale and color printing. This is 1933, 34, and a wonderful shape. The ones today are, they're pale imitations, but wonderful thing. Over here, this is an edition of Struwelpeter from 1853 in New York. It's pretty fragile and beat up, but you can work through it.
Tell them about that.
Oh, again, and this is the Germanic folktale tradition being told and then distributed out to England, to America. And this happens in the middle of the 19th century. All the international folk traditions and folklore get collected and brought to print and then translated. So you have Hans Christian Andersen, you have Grimm, you have Struwelpeter, you have, this is Heinrich Hoffmann, you have it happening in America, you have it in the same principles in France and in England. This is just a retelling in America. But these are tales of what happens to young children who misbehave and the punishments they receive, and they're wonderfully gruesome. And I really like them. There's the young girl who played with matches, and But dreadful tale to tell, the match upon her apron fell, it kindled, burnt her hands, her head, all over her the flames should soon spread. And then her little cats are sort of crying and trying to put out her ashes with their tears after the young girl plays with matches and immolates herself. So this is again, types of things you have. First edition of Little Women, worth looking at. This is an original Kate Greenaway drawing. Mickey Mouse movie stories from the 30s. Again, a different sort of commercial tie-in. On this table are all off-prints and books that Augusta Baker produced. Her whole series of books about the Negro for children in the public library, her book lists, starting in the 40s and going right through to the 60s. So these are all her publications. And then two other tables of some interesting things I've had out recently from the Augusta Baker collection, including, I think, 2 or 3 of her edited collections of stories, which are worth looking at. And then, of course, this is, again, one of the centerpieces of our collection, which we really value and have here. It's still on loan from the Baker family. This is her retirement book. This was what her friends and her colleagues at the New York Public gathered together and organized when she retired in 1974. And they basically solicited contributions from everyone and anyone in the industry, publishers, authors, illustrators, storytellers, and everyone contributed a page. And it was bound up and then presented to her at her retirement. So it's a grand, sweeping who's who of the industry and the field at 1974, and also their feelings for Augusta Baker. So everyone contributed something a little bit different. This is Tom Feelings doing a portrait, but it goes through, and everyone did something a little bit different. Some people did little pieces of artwork, other people sort of made a little tribute page, people wrote poems, and you have Crockett Johnson and Madeline Langell and Isaac Asimov writing in. You have H.A. Ray and Maurice Sendak. You have John Steptoe. You have Tasha Tudor. And Gail Haley. You have letters from publishers. Ezra Jack Keats did this funky collage. And they all, as you page through this carefully, which we can do carefully, you really see that come out. I mean, it's a wonderful thing, a very special document. There's nothing quite like it in all of children's literature. There's Crockett Johnson. I'll leave it open to him. Okay, I'll stop. I've talked long enough. We can look at some books, get up, we can wander around, I can answer questions along the way, but I really do want to see an interaction with some of these things.